Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 125 with Dana James. Some of my favorite parts of this episode were when she shares about the 4 archetypes and how she discovered them and why we need to know our archetype in order to thrive in all areas of our life. But there is so much more goodness, wisdom, and inspiration that you get in the full episode. So to listen to the full podcast and get all the info in the show notes, head on over to melissaambrosini.com/125 right now. Dana, welcome. It is so great to have you on the show. Can you tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are today?
I am a functional medicine nutritionist and cognitive behavioral therapist, and it has been a 18-year process for me to get there. Prior to that, I was in finance. I grew up in Australia, just like you. And at the age of 26, I decided to take 9 months off and travel the world. And that's what I did. And I went looking for answers. And I will tell you, I didn't find any answers because it all comes from the mind. I ended up in London and wanted a career shift and found myself surrounded by nutrition books. So decided to move in that direction. And that was a 4-year program studying nutrition, functional medicine, and therapy at the time. I moved to New York, and that's where I established my practice. And since then, it's been an observation into the minds of women and looking at their bodies at the same time, and until I've now been able to really connect the two.
Can you explain what these 4 archetypes are?
Yes, an archetype just means model, because I think sometimes people get confused about what that is. And it just means like the 4 models of women. So I created the 4 female archetype structure to give women the opportunity to really understand very complex interactions between the physical body and the mind. Otherwise, it was just cumbersome. And I realized that the reason we had these seemingly self-sabotaging behaviors in our relationship to food and even other women or the men in our life had to do with where we sourced our self-worth from. And so I developed these archetypes based on that. Where was that source of self-worth? And it wasn't whether it was your self-worth was good or bad, it was just where did it come from? What was the identity? And the first one is the nurturer. The nurturer sources her sense of self-worth from being there for others. She's very open, giving, compassionate, kind. The downs, and really her fear attached to that is that she's not going to be needed. So then this creates a whole set of other behaviors, which I'll come on to. The Wonder Woman sources her self-worth from success, achievement, and recognition. And so she's a very driven woman. She's very ambitious. The fear for her is that she's going to become irrelevant. So that can put her under an extraordinary amount of stress to be the best. And again, we'll come back to what that actually means in the physical body. Then there's the femme fatale, and the femme fatale gets her source of self-worth from her physical body. And this is a really hard place to be, because if you don't feel good in your body, you're going to feel pretty worthless. If you feel really good in your body, you are going to be flying high. So the extreme between a balanced femme fatale and an out of balance femme fatale is so at the opposite ends of the spectrum that sometimes the femme fatales don't even recognize one another, except for this understanding that they are very vulnerable to the thoughts on their physical body. Then there's the ethereal, and the ethereal likes to be different. She's very intuitive, creative, and imaginative. However, she was the weird girl at school. She just sort of didn't really fit in. And as a coping strategy, she would retreat into her inner world. And that was the place where she, developed that imaginative mind. However, she doesn't always relish in that. Some of the ethereals can take on the mask of the other archetypes, principally the Wonder Woman and the femme fatale, because society values success and looks. And so if that's her, she's even more discombobulated than an out of balance femme fatale and Wonder Woman, because it's really foreign to her instinctive way of being, which is very free spirited. So, those are the 4 archetypes in a nutshell of how they were actually derived. And then there's a whole host of behaviors that are attached to that. And then food behaviors, and then there's hormones, and then an eating plan. So it's a big model, but it's a very robust model.
Wow. And how did you come up with this?
It was years and years of listening to my clients' stories. And it wasn't like this light bulb moment. And sometimes I wish it was. It was just sort of piecing it all together. So given my background was principally in functional medicine, I very much understood the physical body and the hormonal aspect of it. So we know that cortisol contributes to belly fat. If you're in the functional medicine world, you're aware that when insulin's elevated, then you'll tend to store body fat everywhere because insulin's the primary fat storage hormone. So it's a very layered process, but it's laid out in a way that's easy to understand. It's like, here's your archetype. Like, these are the behaviors that happen with this particular archetype. Here's the hormonal issues. Here's the diet that matches that, so that we're no longer women are like, do I go on the paleo? Do I go on the ketogenic? Should I do intermittent fasting? Right? There's all of that noise that happens. They no longer need to do that. It's like you match the plan to your mindset and to your body type. And then the final piece of the archetype diet is the mind. It's like, well, how do you crack these imprints? And so I take people through this 6R reprogramming process to do that. And I'm more than happy to talk about how to do that on this call, depending on how much time we have.
How do these archetypes compare to the Ayurvedic doshas?
So they weren't developed based on the Ayurvedic doshas. However, when you compare them, there are absolute crossovers, which I would hope, because the Ayurvedic doshas have been around for 5,000 years. And the Wonder Woman tends to be very Pitta. I'm a Wonder Woman. I think we discovered that you're a Wonder Woman. And so it's very Pitta, like we're fiery. Like there's that drive there. Then the ethereal is absolutely Vata. Very airy and light, and tends to have that same body type that you would predict with the Vata dosha. And the nurture is very Kapha. Right? She constantly feels stuck and stagnant. And there isn't the equivalent for the femme fatale, but the way that I interpret that through the doshas is to say that the femme fatale is really a byproduct of society today, because we have for way too long overvalued the importance of a woman's body. And so she's come out of that. Now, what I will say with the doshas is that they are very different in their eating styles. So I recently did a podcast with Sarah Rose, and I thought I was quite conversant about doshas. And then she says, "Oh no, it's a vegetarian plan." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't even realize that." And so for these archetypes here, it's not a vegetarian plan. It's an omnivore plan, although they can all be adjusted to follow a vegetarian or a vegan diet. And so I'm conscious to stress that point, that they are very different. I don't want to do any disservice to the Ayurvedic doshas there. For all of the archetypes, bar the ethereal, I recommend that they start with a protein-based breakfast. So that could be a plant-based smoothie with a really good vegan protein powder. Or it could be a chia seed pudding, and the chia seed has the same amount of protein as an egg, or it could certainly be eggs. Like that's the best choice for breakfast. For the ethereal, she's the only one who I suggest could eat carbohydrates for breakfast, because she needs those carbs to have her feel grounded. So she's good with the overnight soaked oats and the quinoa bowls, and no one should ever be on an acai bowl. They're way too sweet, by the way. She's the only one that can be on those carbs. Everybody else should start with a protein-based breakfast, because it ultimately suppresses the appetite throughout the rest of the day, and it keeps the blood sugar levels very stable. Hence why I was laughing this morning that here I was having some little Japanese rice crackers and a green juice. I will tell you why. I was totally out of frozen fruit. Otherwise, I would have had a smoothie this morning. And how do you know if you're adrenally fatigued? You do high intensity exercise and you feel worse afterwards. Right? So that's one indication. And adrenal fatigue is thrown around, but what it really means is that you don't have cortisol coming in this really beautiful ELLE shape, which is like your circadian rhythm anymore. So cortisol should be elevated in the morning and then gradually taper off throughout the day so you can get to sleep. For somebody who's adrenally fatigued, it's flatlining. Like it's just flat. You've got no energy in the morning, and maybe sometimes it kicks up in the evening and then you're a little wired. But also your adrenaline and noradrenaline is you have such low levels of that. And adrenaline and noradrenaline are your fight and flight hormones. So when you drink a cup of coffee, you stimulate the adrenaline and noradrenaline. So you don't want to be having a cup of coffee and stimulating that when your resources are so minor. Again, you want the adrenaline and noradrenaline to be kicking in when you're truly under a stress response. Like you're driving somewhere and then you need to slam on the brakes. You need to have enough adrenaline and noradrenaline in the body to be able to recognize that there's an issue, that there's a crisis happening, and to slam on the brakes.
What do you attribute all of your success to?
Thank you very much for that, Melissa. I would say it's being present. I really listen to my clients, really listen to them. And I have this unbelievable passion for helping them see success. And I'm willing to write it out with them. If they are there with me, then we are going to go looking for answers when there are no answers. Breath is the only system that has a dual control system in the body, so we can consciously change it, and it's also in the unconscious. There's no other system in the body. And so when you consciously use your breath, you can change like where in the brain you respond from. So like a lot of Kundalini breathwork is all about that. It's about reprogramming the brain so that you are no longer in this fight, flight, freeze mode, and you start to move into the prefrontal cortex, which is where the rational processing part of the brain is. It's very powerful breath, but highly, highly underrated. Rolfing is a method where it's like getting into the fascia to start to release like blocks that are there, either from a physical or an emotional perspective. And I line this beautiful biomat, and she's got the candles going, and it's just time for me to, once I leave, I walk out feeling very ethereal. And I also have salt baths. So I sit in a salt bath for 20 minutes after a day of consulting, because like my energetic field is picking up on everybody else's field. And I don't want to start carrying the wounds of my clients because it's not fair to my other clients. So when somebody's going through some type of like binge eating, I don't want to pick up on that. And there's such an energy shift that happens when you consult. You really got to put up these boundaries so you're not porous.